Hi, this is Susan. So we're going to make mush. The first thing I need to do is add some more wood to the stove so that it'll be nice and ready when we're ready to make the mush. So I'm going to take the burner lid off. Actually, my stove, I'm going to take off both pieces and this eye piece shaped like the letter I. And I'm going to drop the log in there. Get it just where I wanted it. So let me grab my poker and I'll scooch it over a little bit and arrange it the way I like it. Alright, now the pieces go back into place. So this is the lid and this is the lid lifter. It has a little spot here where one can lift it. There we go. Okay. So we added some more wood to the fire. So now what we need to do is put the pot, we're going to put the bean pot on the fire so that we can heat up the boiling water. So the recipe is like 1 to 1 to 2. So for every 1 cup of cornmeal, I mix it with 1 cup of cold water, and then I would boil it in 2 cups of boiling water. But I'm going to make a bigger recipe than that. I'm going to take 4 cups of cornmeal with 4 cups of cold water and then boil that in 8 cups of boiling water. So I need 8 cups of boiling water on the stove. So what I do is I've got my lid lifter in my pocket. I need to grab myself a couple hot pads. Just keep some of these handy. I'm going to take this lid off and adjust the camera so you see that the flames are kind of coming out of the lid. So what I'm going to do is put my pot right into that hole. I'm going to try to get it level. And I kind of preheated this pot. It's been sitting on the stove for like last hour as I was getting everything ready. Move it the way I like it so that the bale is laying as flat as possible for the stirring and it's as level as possible. Very good. Now this picture that I have is not historically accurate to this time period, but it's a ½ a gallon measure. Which is what 8 cups are. 8 cups are 2 quarts and 2 quarts are ½ a gallon. So we'll let that cook. The water is heating up on the stove so that we have boiling water. I'm reading the recipes from the Buckeye and the Kentucky Housewife because I'm leaning towards the Kentucky Housewife recipe. So the Buckeye says, put fresh water in a kettle to boil, salt to suit the taste. When it begins to boil, stir in the meal, letting it sift through the fingers slowly to prevent lumps, adding it a little faster at the last, until as thick as can be conveniently stirred with one hand. Set in the oven in the kettle, bake an hour, and it will be thoroughly cooked. It takes cornmeal so long to cook thoroughly that it is very difficult to boil it until done without burning. When intended for frying cold, some may add while making it about a pint of flour to 3 quarts of meal. Have a hardwood paddle 2 feet long with a blade 2 inches wide and 7 inches long to stir with. Mrs. W. Woods. So this pot is about 12 inches tall and the ovens on the stoves you have are 12 inches square. So her recipe is not going to work. And her stove must have burned really hot because I have successfully made cornmeal mush on a stove without burning it. It just takes a little care. So let's read what the Kentucky Housewife has to say. So this recipe is from 1839, so much older than 1877. And she calls it Indian mush and not corn mush because cornmeal equals Indian meal because we got it from the Indians. That's the reason it's called that. She starts like this. Like many other of our receipts is an old-fashioned word for recipe. The process of making mush is quite plain and simple, yet it is often badly prepared. and to the inexperienced, some instructions are necessary. Sift some fine Indian meal. Make a smooth batter of it by stirring in a sufficiency of cold water. That's the step we're going to follow, adding the cold water. Having ready a pot of boiling water, throw in a handful of salt and stir in your batter till it is like a very thick soup. She must have been making a huge amount of mush to season it with a handful of salt. Enough that you would need a 2-foot-long paddle. You get the idea how common mush is. Back to the recipe. Boil it till the proper consistency and stir it frequently to prevent it being lumpy and to keep it from burning at the bottom. Mush made in this manner will never fail to be thoroughly done and clear of lumps, which are 2 common failures. Cold mush may be sliced and fried brown in butter. They are very good for breakfast. All right. Okay, so it's time to start adding the ingredients. I'm going to make a big batch, so I'm going to need 4 cups of cornmeal and 4 cups of cold water, and I'm going to mix them in this bowl. I don't have a cup measure, but I do have this pint measure. So I'm going to measure 2 of these of cornmeal, and then this one is a quart measure, which already has a quart of water in it, so I'll pour that in. So I have yellow cornmeal and white cornmeal, and these are readily available at the store here in the States. I assume in Canada too, but I don't know that for a fact. There used to be a difference between yellow cornmeal and white cornmeal, and some people still think there's a difference. I don't find any difference. I think through the modern processing of corn into cornmeal, those past finite, delightful differences are lost to us, and so I don't really know what they are. So, all right, let's do this. So I'm going to measure. Let's see, what do we have here first? The white cornmeal. So I've got my pint measure, and we are going to fill it all the way up to the rim. And I'm a little low on that one, so we'll have to add some yellow onto that because it doesn't really matter. So there we go. So there is 2 cups, a pint, and I'm a little shy. Let me go grab some more in the pint off with a little bit more, so we have a full pint. So that means we have 4 cups or a quart of meal. Cornmeal, Indian meal, whatever you want to call it. They call it both of those things. Salt. Cornmeal and potatoes need to be heavily salted, in my opinion. So they need 1 teaspoon of salt per cup of cornmeal. So then I need 4 teaspoons of salt. And this is the teaspoons. This is literally something you would put at the table. Somebody could stir their tea or their coffee with it, or it's not quite big enough for soup. It's really not a soup spoon. But I've measured this compared to my modern measuring teaspoon, and it's the same. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 teaspoons of salt. Now let's stir the salt and the meal together. And then we measure in 4 cups of water, or 1 quart of water, because we had 4 cups of meal, or 1 quart of meal. So it's 1 to 1. And on the stove, what's boiling is the 8 cups, because then this is 8 cups of material altogether. 4 cups of meal, 4 cups of water. 8 cups altogether. Now, as the corn mixes in here, the cold water is not going to suddenly make the corn dissolve. It will separate. It's a little bit like mixing water into sand. You can keep it in suspension while you're mixing, but then it settles to the bottom. So the Buckeye recipe says to add the cornmeal to the boiling water by sifting it through your fingers, which I've tried. The Kentucky Housewife recipe said to make this kind of thick batter, and I have found over the years that this is the more successful way to do it. All right, that's good. That is ready to go onto the stove. So I'm going to take the lid off the pot, and you can see all the steam come up. It is boiling, boiling. I've got my mixture of cornmeal and water, the cold water that we did just a second ago. So I don't want all the water to boil in. I need that kind of mixture to go in. All right, tricky, tricky. So I need to keep stirring. Making a bit of a mess, that's okay. The important thing is that I keep the keep stirring in the pot, in the cooking pot, which is a bean pot, so it doesn't clump up. Okay, it's looking really good. I know you can't see inside the pot. Alright, let's get all that cornmeal mixed in. It's definitely getting thick in the pot. It has stopped boiling. Whoops! Just let me get the rest of this in here. The little bit of cornmeal that has splattered out, I can smell it cooking on the hot range top. It smells a little bit like popcorn. Let me stir this up here. Okay, so now you can see the cornmeal cooking in the pot. Gosh, it's almost thick enough already. The spoon is standing up. So I'm going to stir it some. I'm going to let it cook here for a while. And then I'm going to take it out of the burner hole. I'm not sure what you call that. Burner hole doesn't seem quite right. I guess you would just say I'm going to take it off directly over the fire, because it's directly over the fire. I'm going to let that cook there, I think, until it starts to bubble and get kind of like dangerously bubble, because it'll start bubbling and splat. There'll be like big, wet, violent bubbles that would burn you if you were standing, if you got hit by one. But I feel like, because it is technically thick enough, although that spoon's a little wobbly, because you're supposed to cook it till the spoon will stand up by itself. But okay, we're starting to get bubbles. But I want it to get hot all the way through. Then I'm going to take it off, right off over the heat, and put the burner lid back in place. I might even scooch it over to a cooler part of the stove. Because even though it looks like the corn has soaked up all the water, and I guess technically it has, it will still taste raw. It needs to cook for a while. I mean, it's cornmeal. It's tough. So we can see the bubbles starting to bubble. I'll be quiet so you can hear what it sounds like. Okay, it is time to take the mush off the heat. So I'm going to lift it up out of that spot, set it to the side, and then you can kind of see the firebox inside. Let me just move the camera over. Please excuse the camera work. There we go. So I'm going to take this opportunity to add another stick of wood to the fire. Now, the corn mush is here, and I'm going to, I'm not sure, I think I will leave it on that part of the stove. Stoves, so the firebox was under these two lids, as you saw. That's where I just added the wood in. So the firebox goes back and forth this way. That's where the firebox is. So that's the hottest part of the stove. Cover that up. This part where I just put the corn mush, this kind of middle third, is medium. And this part over here is the lowest heat. Now the proverbial back burner should be back here, but my stove, it's this one up in front. So the back burner is where things cook the slowest. But I'm going to leave it in the middle for now, and I'm going to put the lid back on it, and then I'll just pay attention to it for the next 30 or 45 minutes while I clean up, and it can just keep cooking, and I'll come back and check on it. It might need a splash of water. Might need two or three splashes of water. So I'm going to put a kettle on the stove here so that I have hot water to add to it. Not cold, because cold would slow down the whole process and wouldn't work. All right, so that is essentially how you make mush. And then we could eat this mush warm tonight, which I plan to eat a bowl of mush. I love mush. So that would be cereal. You might call that maize porridge. Back in the day in England, what we called corn, you called maize, and you call oatmeal porridge, where we just call oatmeal. In this time period, you could have called it oatmeal, or you could have called it oat mush, because you can have wheat mush, corn mush, rye mush, oat mush. So mush is really a process of cooking grain in water to eat as a hot cereal or to turn leftovers in. And I tell you, leftover mush fried in fat is really good. Even in a modern sense, leftover mush cut into those little strips and put in your air fryer, delicious. Anyway, that's it. Now I have to put all this together, and I hope it was helpful. Bye-bye. Hey, I wanted to add one thing. One of the really nice things about cooking this mush in a bean pot is that there's this, now since it has 3 legs, the pot isn't touching the top of the stove. There's an air gap there. So it's going to be much less likely that it burns on the bottom. Now, if I had just a regular pot, like this enamelware or this graniteware pot, it would burn because it's sitting right on the stove, and on top of that, it's a very thin metal. The cast iron is very thin, and it's got that air gap. So it can keep cooking without burning. And I'm going to put a lid back on it because that'll help keep some of the moisture in. So I just had to come back and tell you that. Bye-bye.